Off you go.
Or we can do it again. Alright, so we should probably just start at the beginning. That sounds good with everyone.
Sounds good.
Alright, so according to Machiavelli, the prince has to be a great pretender and dissembler. Explain what Machiavelli meant using specific examples. I kind of think that he meant it's more about appearance than like the actual way they ruled. And I think that he's more focused on like, I think that's actually a corrupt part of nature in his eyes because like to be a great pretender is, I don't think it's a key you really need to rule effectively, but it's something you need to be elected, like how nowadays people campaigning for office will just say whatever the people want to hear and then not actually act on it. And like a good quote I have for that is, the common people are always impressed by appearances and results, on page 57, and he's just saying how like gullible the people are and how they'll fall for anything as long as you put on a good show.
Yeah, I think what he meant by was you shouldn't sort of tell, this might not be today because you get elected and stuff, but when he was saying, I think it means that you shouldn't tell everyone your plans in order to be successful, because if you would tell someone, then maybe they would tell someone else and it would get into the wrong hands. For example, on page 56, Machiavelli says that the princes who achieved great things was they have given their word lightly, who have known how to trick men with their cunning. And it's sort of saying that you have to sort of keep to yourself when it comes to your inner state.
Okay. I think another quote that like fits us all good is on page 57. I got a prince therefore not necessarily have all the good qualities mentioned above, but he should certainly appear to have them.
Yeah.
And I think this is like one like big major like quote that falls into this, because I know like in today's world they do it the same, but it's saying like almost that the Machiavelli believed that even though you might be a good prince or you aren't even a good prince, you should still come off to be a good prince to the people, so they know, like, confident in your role. So I think that's like one.
So that people like believe.
Yeah, it says it right below what you just said, or well, on the same page. Men are so simple and so much creatures of circumstance that the deceiver will always find someone ready to be deceived.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to like what we're saying is like when it's convenient, you use what you said and say, hey, I said that, and then when it's
the people need to hear what they want to hear rather than like what is the truth. You know?
Well, I think the problem is though, if someone has like, because we don't know what goes on in Washington today. Like we pretend like we do, but there's no telling what goes on there. We only know what we hear, and so like it's this thing. I mean, I don't see how you get out of it, because people will always inherently want their own power. And so it's not that hard to figure out how to do it. Oh, you make everyone happy. Well, if you can't actually make them happy, you try to make them think that they're happy. So how do we get out of it?
I think Machiavelli, this whole pretender and dissembler thing, he wants to keep a ruler to keep everything to himself that he can. He wants the public to only know what they have to know and what will make them happy. Which most of the time, what makes them happy, there isn't too much of the stuff that makes them happy most of the time. It'd be best if they didn't know.
And that goes back to like being cunning and deceitful over being honest, because I think I said this in the chat earlier, but it's like it's not, the prince isn't telling you how to be a good person, it's telling you how to be successful. And if sometimes that requires like going against what you believe is right, then and just as means and you're successful.
Yeah.
I think too that like there's kind of like more than one meaning here, because I had what Lizzie wrote down about how you have to kind of look put together even if you're not. You want to like appear like you are. But then also on page 57 it says one must know how to color one's actions and to be a great liar and deceiver. So one's more just like acting like it, and you're not really saying like, oh, I can do all this stuff. It's more just like how people see you and how people think you are. And the other one's kind of more like you're going out of your way to say something that you're not, and to actually like lose their trust eventually, I guess.
Yeah, I think, well, I personally think that from what he's saying, anyone could be a prince as long as you're a good actor and you can put on a show. Like, this kind of relates, have you ever seen the movie Argo? Have you guys? Okay, well anyways, it's about these people get trapped in the Iranian embassy, and these FBI agents have to go get them, and the only way is if they pretend to be movie stars and they're going to film a movie in the desert in Iran. So they, was it Iran?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure. And so they go there and they're FBI agents, but they just grow out their beards and get all this camera equipment, and they're recognized as filmmakers there. And this prince is nothing special about him except for the fact that he just happens to be up top and he's telling everyone what they want.
Yeah, I think similar to that, I think Machiavelli gave the example of Alexander VI and how he was a past master of the art, as his deceptions always had the result that he intended, meaning that if you can trick people, you can trick them to what you want them to do without them knowing.
I think if a ruler doesn't do this, then the people won't be happy because they'll be seeing all these things that aren't going well, and a ruler that could lie and hide this, the people wouldn't know, and so they would be happy still. And on page 69 it says, with the advantage going to the one who best knows how to play the fox. So a ruler that knows how to act and deceive everyone will be more successful, and the people will be more successful.
And when it's going well, then you might be able to tell people.
Yeah.
I think it's also, you can go.
This is gonna make me sound like an awful person. But like,
Let's hear it.
the way that Machiavelli's writing, it's essentially like, this is how you keep complete power, and you do that, you can do whatever you want as long as you keep your power, you're all good. And so if that's the goal, honestly, his ways and like lying to people, they're genius, because that's how you achieve it. Is it good?
It's true.
No. It's so true though.
Like
And that's where I get very conflicted about this book. It's so true, I think, in most situations, but at the same time, it's like, this is such an awful theory to like, but I think for his goal of just keeping the prince in power, all of this has to happen, because if you don't, people aren't gonna like you, you're gonna get kicked out of power, and then...
What do you think the approval rating of our presidents would be if we knew everything about them? What were you going to say?
I think it's
I just thought that was a good segue to question 2, because
Well, let's do it.
about human nature. I mean, I just thought that your like whole notion that they have to do it, I think goes back.
I think like as people that we like want to hear, I mean we like all fall for it and we like want to hear what's like the good thing, and we like don't want to hear a prince like stand up and be like, well, we're all about to die because we're being taken over.
So in that way, I would think sort of human nature is kind of, well, a lot of people aren't very open-minded and they only want to hear what they want to.
I actually think that he's saying that all the people being ruled are like susceptible. They're kind of open-minded to whatever the ruler says. Like, well, actually, I guess they're kind of
But it depends on
closed-minded.
what the ruler's saying. It's sort of
Yeah, they don't have like the
ancient.
independent will or like the independent knowledge to like go against him. You know.
I think what he was saying was like he told, I guess in a book, that we're all born with like self-interest and we all want like what, you know, like we all want what we know. And so at times people can be trustworthy, but they quickly turn selfish and want the good for themselves. Like for example, if you were like wanting a goal for a team or whatever, and you can make the shot, you're gonna make that shot and not kick it to someone else because like you want the like the glory of being like,
Yeah,
I made that shot.
He says the mercenary captains are either capable men or they are not. If they are, you cannot trust them because they always aspire to their own greatness.
Yeah, I have that as well.
And I think that's why he doesn't agree with individualism.
You say that like people, it's on page 54, one can make this generalization about men. They're ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers. They shun danger and are greedy for profit. But at the same time, that sounds like his exact description of
It's
the prince.
Yeah.
I
Like
think it's
liars,
completely the same.
deceivers, greedy for profit.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I found interesting was when I was looking up stuff, I think it was for debate actually, I came across this thing that was like Machiavelli had written a different book, not written for the Medici, and in that, if I'm not mistaken, he actually advocated a republic, which would have been giving the people power. So I thought it was interesting that he's like complaining so much about human nature, yet at the end of the day he's like, oh, let's give the power to the people.
It's completely hypocritical. I mean, I think his view on human nature is completely corrupt, and I feel like he totally discounts all of the people being ruled. And
they're of no value.
yeah, they're of no value. I think his personal or his view on the ruler is actually what he's saying is like is kind of how the rulers rulers, they're not doing stuff to rule effectively, they're doing stuff for their own personal gain. Like, I have the biggest army, I have the biggest, like, yeah, I have the biggest
And
amount
I
of
think
land.
it's interesting how he said he doesn't agree with others acting in their own interest, but he says that the prince should act in his own interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's
So
totally
everyone
not
should act
acting
in
in
The
their
whole
Right.
purpose
Right.
of the book is saying how you maintain and increase your power.
Yeah,
Right.
it's supposed to be written for the prince, not for the people. So everything he says is going to be based on what a prince should know, what a prince should do to support or to keep his power.
But
So
he's
I don't-
criticizing the people for doing the things that he's encouraging princes to do.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter if the prince is like doing good things, it's just that
Right.
he is
Yeah.
the prince.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's title.
Justify, like when he talks about human nature and like he's the prince or whatever, he kind of uses it to justify himself too, because it says on page 56 he talks about how men are wretched creatures who would not keep their word to you, so you need not to keep your word to them. So he's kind of saying like, if they're not gonna, if you don't think you can trust them or whatever, like, or if you know that they're out to help themselves, then there's no point in trying. He's like giving him the right of way to just do whatever he wants, I guess.
Yeah. Just wondering, is your views of human nature the same?
I think in some way mine is the same, because I do feel that like everyone has that ability to want to be further than the other person behind them. They want to be like ahead of them. But I also don't think that like we're like selfish and that we're gonna do like everything for ourselves, because I do believe that people can do good for others. Like
I kind of agree with the Italian humanists. Like, when people are trying to better themselves, everyone becomes better.
Yeah.
Like,
But in
if
this
you're
case,
trying
it's-
to,
well,
to some extent, yeah.
some people are always just
Right.
coming up on
If you're
top.
trying to hurt others to better yourself, then I don't agree with it. But if you're bettering yourself just for that purpose, then I do agree.
I agree with his like thoughts on human nature. I do think people are selfish, and that when they're selfish, that they sometimes do bring down other people, but a lot of times they also, like you said, bring others up.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think it's a lot more common to be selfish than to be selfless.
Yeah, I think
It's-
that takes like a special person, not necessarily a
Yeah.
special person, but like you have to try not to be selfish.
Do you remember the whole concept of rugged individualism with Ayn Rand and that whole thing? It's just
Yeah.
everything you do is about personal gain, where you may
Right.
think
Yeah.
that
Right.
I'm doing something to help someone out, you're doing that to improve yourself, you know?
I think I'm with Barton. Like, I think people are inherently selfish, but I think Ayn Rand especially, but also Machiavelli, they take it to the extreme.
Oh, yeah.
Like, people are selfish, but they're not that selfish. Like, we have some sense of like where to draw the line in most cases, but like both of them basically say you don't have to draw that line. Like, it doesn't matter.
Do you think? Go ahead. Okay. Well, do you think like the attitude of the people back then is different than like what we have now? Do you think that maybe they were more selfish because I mean they were less cultured?
It was more of a survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
I think
I
because
don't
they
know.
had less, they valued it more.
I feel like because they were controlled so much back then that like they were kind of selfish, but like it wasn't so much of an issue back then
Yeah,
because they had to work for
They
what
had
was above.
nowhere, especially like in the Middle Ages, they had nowhere to go.
Yeah, it's very
If you're a
structured.
peasant, like, you can be as selfish as you want, but you're still stuck in
Yeah,
peasant
you're
world,
never-
so it's
Yeah.
not nearly as big of a deal.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you guys want to? Oh, no, sorry. Please.
It's true that like when you're trying to help yourself now, you can kind of get farther in life. But I think also when he was talking about how you don't have to be loyal to those around you if you don't think they're going to be loyal to you, I think a lot of loyalty comes from if they think you're loyal and like they can trust you. So I think if you want to make it like higher up or whatever, I think a big part of that is having people that they think they can trust you.
Yeah.
I don't think you should just like, oh, I'm just gonna say things and not keep my word.
It's a two-way road.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys want to transition to number 3?
Yeah.
Do it.
Okay, do you want to do best case or worst case first?
Let's do
Um,
best
Let's
case.
Yeah, I
do
think
best
best
case.
case. Well, I think when he's like explaining this book, he doesn't really put into like the worst thing to do is blah blah blah. So I think like this book is mostly about what's the best you can do, and it doesn't really focus much on the worst. So I think like one major part that would be like the best case scenario is like having when you're satisfied with like your kingdom's wealth, but free and lavish with the money that you have earned from other countries. So you're just like gaining more power, but you're kind of stuck at a point where you're like, you're not like you're fine with where you are. I think like that was
I think one of the really key things that he emphasizes a great deal, and also just other people do when they're talking about the prince, is that you have to be cunning and able, like in chapter 18 when they say one must be a fox in order to recognize traps and a lion to frighten off wolves. I think that's like his key message, well, one of them.
And
I
I also,
think- I think the idea of like worst case, best case scenario is kind of, it's a little backwards because Machiavelli's like view is kind of, it's corrupt in the eyes of the people because like all the things he says is to be deceitful, don't give too much fortune to like the people under your rule. It's all the stuff that you know, if like the peasants, they would, if they heard that, they wouldn't like it. And I think it's kind of odd because like the best case scenario would be the ruler that's like deceitful and like does what he has to do, and the best case scenario would be if the ruler was too kind to his people. Yeah.
I think looking at a bigger picture, his best case is that the prince has all the power that he wants and he's not challenged. And then the worst case is the prince is being challenged, there's a revolt, he's dead, he doesn't have power, or whatever.
Yeah.
So then everything else is just how you get there.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good quote on page 54. It says, "It is far better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." And that is, I think, his ideal best case scenario because although we may seem like we've been talking that the best case would just be ultimate power and I'm going to crush everything, like I am the ultimate. I think it is true that being deceitful, you have to be loved a little bit, like in order for you to continue, or else you'll be overthrown.
get support.
Yeah.
and I think now, like, we have the power, like we as people have the power to choose who we want to lead us. So if the leader is not at least loved a little bit, then they won't
Yeah, it's
have
like
any
today-
influence
Not even
because they
love,
won't
just
have the
if you can deal with the leader.
right, like respect even. Like,
Yeah.
kind of like going back to Selena's idea of like how having everything is like good. On page 52 it says great things have been accomplished only by those who have been held in misery and those who have met disaster. So it just shows that like the best state you can be is when you're like secure and happy, and the worst state is like when you're like everyone else is like ruined.
You guys still have 2 minutes, and they owe you 2 minutes because they went over 2 minutes. So.
All right, do you guys want to go to the last question?
Yeah,
really
we
fast?
have to.
Let's do it.
Wait, liberal or conservative?
I said he was a liberal.
I said he was a liberal.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
I just think it's kind of, well, I mean, obviously you can go into greater depth, but I just think it's pretty obvious that he'd be a liberal because of the whole government control.
Government action.
Exactly.
He
Yeah.
takes he
I
wants a lot.
I disagree with you. I think that his whole thing is that it's only the prince and the prince controls everything.
But wouldn't that be government?
Yeah, because like he believes in a big government, but not like the people doing things.
Because the prince is part of government that then would solve the
Because I
problem.
looked at the definition of a conservative and it said that it was like the ruler has the most power.
Yeah, and the ruler.
So not
I think it was more
not
like-
just not the
But
whole.
when you think about it from the individual
Yeah.
prosper side, that is kind of the conservative about how individual gain, that's the prince, but it's only the prince, you know, not.
I thought he was a liberal because in the conservative definition it says empowerment of the individual is one of the characteristics.
Yeah.
So since it was the opposite, then I just associated it with
Exactly.
liberal.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking
Yeah.
that that was for the prince. So.
I said
like
too
Yeah.
that he was a conservative just because I know he doesn't really believe in individualism as much, but he's kind of has, when I think of him, it's kind of like every man for himself because it's like he's going to lie to you and you have to figure out like if you're going to trust them. It's not like, oh, I'm going to tell you everything about me. I'm going to like try to play you kind of and pretend like I'm something I'm not. So I kind of said that.
Yeah. And when he talks about, like, going back to talking about being allies with people, and this kind of goes back to the last question, but he says on page 72, a prince also wins prestige for being a true friend or a true enemy. And I think he then contradicts himself for being, he says that morals get in the way of having a good secular society, but then he says that you need to be true and loyal. But it all comes back to, like, gaining yourself power.
I like it.
Yeah.